Go.
Okay. My name is Nicolas and I'm a compulsive eater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the grey sheet. I write them down and turn them over to my sponsor. I don't eat between meals no matter what, and abstinence is the number one priority in my life. I'm really glad to be here, and just in relation to what was said before, when you see a turtle sitting on a fence post, you know he's had help. That is my situation. I am completely incapable of remaining abstinent in my own power. It doesn't reside in me. I'm a compulsive eater. The norm for me is to eat compulsively, either to overeat or to undereat, and I'll say a little bit more about that. Now, I know that a number of you have heard my story before, but as Dermot is here at his first meeting, I'm going to actually share my story as I would to a newcomer. Okay? And I'm going to also throw in a few things, because he has his first GreySheet abstinent meal today. But there are a number of things that I forgot to mention as I was talking you through it, and I may sort of throw in the odd sort of tool and thing that you need to be mindful of going forward. Okay, so my first memory is of eating. I'm sitting in my high chair. I'm supping this sweet, runny, dairy-fied Scottish cereal thing, slurping it down and getting this wodged up feeling inside, and seeing my mother beaming at me. And this is like, it's a golden moment. I've got this perfectly right, to get the mixture just right. The admiration of the female and that sense of satiation. And I sought that feeling from then onwards. I mean, I can just go 30 years forward, and I'm walking out of a tent where we've had a discotheque in Kenya, and I've had a couple of stiff whiskies, and I've just engaged in some extremely provocative dancing with a complete stranger, and I walk out into the African night, and there's crickets and the stars, and I've just got the mixture just right. It's like, this is what I've been looking for all this time. But of course, it never lasted. I was, and I would find myself when that moment passed, craving for more. And I was quite a skinny kid until the age of 9, and then I think something happened, maybe something that I've still not been able to recover, to do with childhood sexual abuse, but I then started putting on weight, and I became very fat and extremely unhappy. And I was put on my first diet at the age of 11. I was drinking a disgusting stuff called Metacal. And my mother kept on catching me raiding the larder. She seemed to know when I'd been in there. I think she was a bit of a foodie herself, so she could tell the telltale signs, But so I was into raiding the larder, and I remember the time when I started being given dinner money. So I was a day boy at an otherwise sort of boarding school, and I was given dinner money so I could pay for school dinners, but I would take them down to the deep frying facility in over the back fields down there, and have a deep fried meal for my lunch instead every day, until the last part of my school career, when I was sort of more senior. I decided I would take the school meals, and things were arranged so that you'd have a table for 8, and the food would come in sort of trays and in big aluminium containers and things like this, with jugs of sweet runny stuff, and I would organise things so that I was on a table where there were only 4 people. So we had basically 4 people, 8 portions of food. But I also at this time was getting into exercise, and this is my exercise bulimic phase, and so I was pretty solid muscle. And I went off to Sandhurst, and there, I mean, Sandhurst was like a training in in compulsive eating. Okay, we would be given 15 minutes to run from our bedroom to the dining hall, eat 3,000 calories, and run back again. 15 minutes. Of course, I had a full set of teeth in those days, so that was a help. Nowadays, I couldn't do that. I just don't have enough teeth. But that is like training for compulsive eating, if anything is, you know. And of course, when we were out on exercise manoeuvres or whatever, we would always have our emergency rations of confectionery bars and things like that. And I was always fascinated by the army rations, you know, these boxes with all sorts of, you know, tins of stuff in it and so on. And well, I can't go any further with that without talking about specific food items, so I won't. Okay, but this time I was pretty solid muscle. I remember I was 12.5 stone, pretty solid muscle, and because we were exercising so hard. But once I got out of Santos and this was the discipline of having to do these things ceased, then I started putting on weight. And I had this very figure-hugging military uniform, as we all did, you see. And very soon, you know, buttons began to sort of get a bit tight, so I had to have it eased. That was the expression. That had eased again. And also, you could have a sand brown belt, you see, and you could have some extra holes made in it, so you could, you know, make it a bit bigger. Well, eventually, that game stopped because I ran out of leather. And I would be, I mean, this time I was on diets, regularly putting myself on diets. You know, there was the one kind of fruit diet. Mm-hmm. Interesting enough, it was one of the one kind of fruits that's not on the grey sheet. I remember doing that one. Then there was the all protein diet. You know, so I was always trying to control my weight, but it was also unsuccessful. I'd lose some weight, white knuckle, but then, you know, I would sort of go back to normal and it would all come back on again, and more. You know, by the time I left the army, my weight was on the way up. I was doing some exercise trying to keep it off, but that didn't last, and so on. And by the time I was 42, I was a lard mountain. And I remember particularly, I was going to be interviewed on the television, and I went to my wardrobe to find a suit, and all my suits were too small. I had to go out and buy this tent, that, you know, to sort of drape over myself. And I remember seeing, at that time I was seeing an industrial psychologist, and I remember him saying to me, he said, I said, you know, I had a few problems. He said, oh, like what? And I said, well, my weight. And I remember him saying, he said, well, you know, I don't know you very well, but looking at your action profile, I can tell you that one day you will find a solution to that.
Oh, wow.
How about that? Yeah. And it's GreySheet. But I struggled on. Now, one of the things that I found was that when I was in a relationship, I would put on weight. It was like I'm trying to now armor up a bit. I'm going to distance myself, and this is all too scary. It's too intimate, you know. So I put on weight, and when I wasn't in a relationship, I'd lose weight. And again, sort of jumping forward to the age of 43. You know, I had just I destroyed by this stage 2 careers and 2 marriages, and lost more money than most people make in a lifetime, and I was 12-stepped. And wonderful thing. I mean, I wish I could have been 12-step when I was still with my family, but that didn't happen. And the person that 12-stepped me said a number of things to me, which I'm really very grateful for. Because I was 12-stepped for lust addiction, but what she said to me, she said, I think you may have a problem with alcohol, but you controlled it really well. She didn't say anything about my weight, but she did suggest that I stayed away from all mood-altering chemicals. And I'm pleased to say I have since then. That was 28 years ago. I've been clean from drugs and alcohol for 28 years. but it was 1 year after that when I was attending meetings of the the Sex Fellowship. I was also attending meetings of AA. That it was then that I realised that I was using certain round baked objects like I used to smoke, chain grazing. I was popping them in there all the time. And I heard about a fellowship called Overeaters Anonymous, and of course I think that was it. And I had my introduction to recovery in another fellowship, but then my eyes were open and I realised that there were other addictions and compulsions, and now food. Aha. So I went to my first OA meeting in America. It was an all-males meeting in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. Funnily enough, that's a wonderful circular thing. And I was taken to the meeting. There were about 30 to 40 men there. Some of them pretty large. Some of them, exhibiting the symptoms of what I now learnt is called fat serenity. They were very big and happy with it, but I heard a strong message there, and on the way there, the person who was driving me was talking about this thing called abstinence. Now I didn't know what that was, so I said, what is abstinence? And he said, abstinence is three moderate meals a day with nothing in between, no sugar and no white flour. That's what he said. And I realised afterwards that what he was giving me was his food plan. But in America, there's a tendency to use my abstinence is, that's that expression, you see. I was a bit confused about that, but I thought to myself, that sounds good, I think I can do that. And I actually did that for 4 years. 3 moderate meals a day, nothing in between, no sugar and white flour, and very occasionally, And it's kind of okay. I didn't binge. But what happened in the end was I started to lose weight. After 4 years, I started to lose weight, and it seemed like my weight was going down and down and down, and it wasn't stopping. Couldn't stop. So at that point, I happened to go to a convention of another fellowship in London, and I saw someone measuring their food. And I thought, well, that's very strange. But that individual, he confronted me about something I said relating to the other fellowship, and I felt like he kicked me in the stomach. It was a very powerful moment. And on the way home, I thought to myself, I'm going to have to ask that guy to sponsor me in the other fellowship. So I arrived home and I called him, and what actually came out of my mouth, to my great surprise, was, will you sponsor me on the grey sheet? She said, I'm on the grey sheet by mistake. So I didn't really mean to be. I just happened to blurt it out one day. So I got onto the grey sheet. I did 4 years on the grey sheet, back-to-back abstinence, and that was really good. But I didn't have a list of phone numbers. I only knew one man on the grey sheet, and that was my sponsor. And he came off the grey sheet. And it precipitated a crisis for me. What shall I do? Shall I stay on the grey sheet? Shall I go back to my basic 301, which was the abstinence I was on before? Or shall I follow him, because he apparently jumped into another food fellowship? So I decided that I would go back to the 301. And today I'm really glad that I did that, because although I lost 4 years of back-to-back abstinence by doing that, what happened in the next 6 months convinced me that I needed to be on the grey sheet. Not because I binged, but because my spiritual condition was going downhill. And so I, after 6 months, I managed, by the grace of God, to get back onto the grey sheet. And since then, 19 years ago, since then, things have got better and better. Now, I would say that in terms of my recovery, the first 5 years in recovery, so sober in AA, sober in my sex fellowship, and abstinence in OA on the 301, things got worse. It's like, I was still somehow going down, trusting that I wasn't going to die in this process, but things were getting worse. When I got onto grey sheet, is that I went round the corner. and even though I came off it, that trajectory still continued and has continued ever since. So this is why I often say to people who are in recovery and finding it's getting tougher and tougher. Actually, it may be one of the reasons. Maybe because there's another addiction that hasn't been addressed. That's one of the classic ones. And if the primary addiction is lust, gluttony comes first, and gluttony has to be dealt with first, and that's an important discovery. A lot of people cannot get sober around lust unless they get sober around gluttony first. It comes as priority, but they're like twins; they feed each other. So I've been abstinent for 19 years and back to back, and that's been a wonderful experience. I love GreySheet now. I'm a GreySheeter by convincement, which means that I'm not here under false pretenses. I know that not only do I need this, but I want it, and I do it, and that's the formula for success. Got to do it. I've done all sorts of exciting and interesting things on the GreySheet, perhaps I won't go into the war stories now, but there is very little that you can't do on the GreySheet. I'd say it'd probably be difficult to be on active service in combat on the GreySheet. That probably would be tricky. Part of anything else, to start off the first 90 days, I had to ring my sponsor every day, so that could be difficult under fire. Once you get to 90 days, the way I'm sponsored is that I send my food to my sponsor by email, and I call him once a week. And I'm very particular about this. I have an alarm set, so 2 alarms set to make sure that I'm on time with that call to my sponsor. It's GreySheet not only is regulating my food, but it's creating a pattern of self-discipline in my life. There's a hymn from a line from the hymn that I remember. Let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. It's that a sober life is an orderly life as well, and the GreySheet imposes order and encourages order, supports order. And so part of the no matter what, I'm willing to go to any lengths to stay abstinent. It means carrying my spare food around with me, making sure. Like today, I left my suitcase on the train. It came out with my backpack, and I sort of kind of broke out in a sweat when I realised I'd done it. But then I began to calm down immediately because I said I've got my scales and my cup and my spoon in my pack, the back. That's all that really matters. If I have to replace the rest, that doesn't matter. I'm a passport. That was it. I had everything on me. And if I were at some point, for instance, I thought something terrible might happen to one of my family or something like that, and I might have to rush off to the hospital bedside or something like that. The first thing that's going to come into my head is food. Get my food packed. I'm going to take my bag with me because I don't know. It's like the astronaut's life support system. The astronaut carries this sort of box around with him. This is my life support system. I've got to have that stuff with me at all times. And it's like a ball and chain, but it's a spiritual ball and chain, and it's a very beautiful thing to have. I'm a prisoner in here. I used to be able to get out by the usual methods, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. I can't now. I'm a prisoner in here. I need to be comfortable in here. And so that's what the GreySheet for me is today, is about living comfortably in abstinence, not straining at the bars, not straining to get out, not straining to escape, but to be really just practicing gratitude and enjoying good food and guilt-free eating. Because this is the thing, in the old days, when I ate, I would either end a meal thinking I'd had too much or not enough. I was never satisfied. Often, having finished a meal, going re-raiding the larder because the cravings being triggered. And, I thought, I want more. Now I finish my meal feeling satisfied, full, and guilt-free, and that's how I want to feel. It's very much, I believe, the same experience as people having sex within marriage, because it's the proper place for sex, and they can experience it as a guilt-free thing.
20 minutes.
That's my time up.
20. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicolas.
50 minutes.
That's
One more
20.
minute.
Okay, I've got another 10. Oh, thank you, Don. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was. It was just.
Getting to the meaty bit. Now about
It's
sex.
just yeah. So, I will just tell you a couple of more stories because so I did this long distance walk from Canterbury to Rome for 79 days, and I remember the first meal we stopped in a field, a sort of ploughed field, and I got my scale out, and I've got one of these manual scales, it's sort of a bit tall sort of thing. And I got out a piece of poultry-related protein, and I sort of popped it into the weigh thing, and the whole thing fell over, and onto the earth. And my two companions were sort of tussling. Anyway, I pick it up, brush it off, and eat it. It just tasted a little bit earthy. Maybe I got a bit of extra protein if there was a worm or something. Anyway, so one of the things that happened during this was that very soon the rhythm of the day coalesced around my eating time. They conformed with me. Breakfast at this time, lunch at this time, supper at that time, and it worked really well. It's one of the things I found that other people might resist GreySheet, but when they actually get into the rhythm, it's very comforting. It's very soothing. It's calming. So that was really good. Then there was the occasion that when we don't mention foods by name in GreySheet. We just mention generic terms. You see. Well, there's a certain vegetable substitute that I was telling you about today, and it looks a bit like sawdust. You know what I mean? I'll show you something, okay? So that, and I'd run out of that, or almost run out of that, and we were walking through this absolutely torrential rain, and arrived at a small Italian village. And I said to my companions, I'm just going to walk around the corner to see whether there might possibly be a health food shop here, because I needed some more sawdust. And I walked around the corner, and there was a health food shop. It most unusual in this small Italian village, a health food shop. And on the shelf, they had one packet, and it had been waiting there for me for at least 2 years. But it was abstinent, And then the other one, when we got to the far end, got to Rome, and I realised late on Saturday evening that the next day the shops were going to be shut, and I didn't have enough sawdust. And so I grabbed an Italian taxi driver, and we were careering round the streets of Rome, mainly trying to communicate with hand luggage, with hand gestures, and to find a place that sold sawdust. And I think it was the most expensive pack of sawdust I ever bought. It cost me €50. But I got it, That's the thing. And well, it's very important to have a phone, because if I have a problem with food, it's important I don't sort it out myself. If I have a problem with my food, I make a mistake with weighing, I drip some oil on my salad or something like that, I pick up the phone. I don't try to sort it out myself, because the thing is that if I try to sort it out myself and I'm not quite sure, I'm going to end up with a guilty conscience, bad head. I don't want that. I want to be guilt-free. So I just call another qualified GreySheet member, somebody with 90 days or more of GreySheet abstinence, and I just say, this is the situation, what do I do? They tell me what to do, and I do it, and it's abstinent. Even if it was a situation where literally the instruction was to throw that meal away and just miss that meal altogether and wait for breakfast. If I do that, what I'm told to do, I'm abstinent. Okay? And of course, often if people aren't, if I'm right in the middle of this crisis, and I dip some oil on my son or something, I can't, I don't have the perspective to sort of see, oh, well, there's another solution there, another solution there. So that's why it's so helpful to have other people. I thought, to start off with, that the other GreySheeters were trying to catch me out. But they're not. They're here to help me. You know, and they'll go to any lengths to support. You know, bring food into hospitals, dig into their reserves to help out the situation. It's an amazing thing. I don't do this alone. I can't do it alone. I just have to rely on my higher power and the fellowship. So the formula is the same here on GreySheet. We join the fellowship, we get a sponsor, we work the 12 steps and we do service. And we weigh and measure without exception. Everywhere. At restaurants, at parties, everywhere. No exceptions. So let's tell you the other funny story. I was at a funeral. So I've heard this before. And the funeral had happened and everybody was sort of milling around the house, and I was in the kitchen and it was my supper time, and I built this huge pyramid of salad and cooked vegetables and protein, and that's right, and I grated some dairy on the top of it, you see. And somebody walked in and said, "That looks very nice," and grabbed some of it and was just about to put it in their mouth. And then there was this, it was a woman, and she wasn't that sort of obviously strong, but it was like, she was going to get at it, and I wasn't going to let her, and eventually, she had to let go. So we have these moments, but it's yeah, I'm just incredibly grateful. It's a great blessing being abstinent. And what Andrew was saying earlier, we come to love this. We come to love this. And love is our gravity. We move towards what we love. So I have a daughter. She has a serious eating disorder. She's not ready for GreySheet yet, but when she is, she knows there's a solution out there. I come from an eating disordered family. Just look at the family photograph album. You can see the fatties and the thinnies. They're anorexics and overeaters. They're there. They're probably bulimics as well, but they're not smiling. And this is inherited. One parent has a problem. The child has a 4 times increased chance of having it. Both parents have it 12 times. That's a genetic aspect of this illness. So I'm not the first person in my family to have the problem. I'm not going to be the last, but I can be a beacon light of recovery to my children and my grandchildren. I've got 6 grandchildren now, and the way they go at these confectionery items, I think there might be the problem there or two in times to come. But there's a solution, and I'm able to carry that, able to show what abstinence can bring. And I was asked a very interesting question, Sarah, before, how do you avoid people turning you into putting you on a pedestal? And I think the most important thing there is to understand that I am a turtle sitting on a fence post. I couldn't have got here on my own. I am powerless over food. I always will be. I'm going to die a compulsive eater. The only question is whether I'm going to die in abstinence or in the food. I hope to be able to make it abstinent. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Nick.